Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Inside Blue. With us today, we have retired NYPD police officer and attorney Joe Murray and retired NYPD lieutenant and assemblyman from Staten Island, Mike Reilly. A couple of issues that have been brewing throughout the state of New York and ultimately throughout the country is the enforcement of executive laws and reopening the states to get everything back to normal as the way we knew it. I think you're going to find today pretty interesting in the sense that Joe is suing the state of New York, Governor Cuomo, under the executive orders that have been implemented. And Mike Reilly, being an assemblyman, he's right into the weeds of Albany and what takes place up there. And we're going to cover some of the issues that are occurring and the green light laws that have just been passed. So with that, Joe, why don't we open with you and tell us about this lawsuit and what's been transpiring as far as the governor's executive orders. I know there's a lot of pushback coming lately.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are, now starting to change the view of the governor. In the beginning, he looked like a rock star.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, it's becoming the, governor show. So,
well, they're pulling back the curtain now, and we're seeing what's really happening with this governor. So thank you, and thank you for having me on. Good to see you too, Mike. Let me just explain what happened and how we got to where we are. Right now, the New York State Legislature empowered Governor Cuomo with legislative power in order to respond to the demands of this crisis, this public health crisis that we're dealing with. What they did is they actually transferred their legislative power to him by this executive law that now allows him to make his own law. And I actually refer to him as King Cuomo in my lawsuit because that's in effect what happened. The Constitution of the United States, Section 4, Article 4, guarantees a Republican form of government. I'm not talking about the Republican Party, I'm talking about Republican representative government. Right. So, I describe it to people, I try to tell them, I said, look, you take Bernie Sanders, it prevents him from creating the People's Republic of Vermont. Every state has to be a Republican form of government. So, then you look at this state constitution. Our state constitution, Article 3, Section 1, empowers the legislature with legislative power, the Senate and the Assembly. That's their authority under our Constitution. And the logic behind it is we are represented by our district legislators. And it's their job to create law on our behalf. So when they convey that to the governor, it takes away a lot of our say because our representatives are beholden to us. We put them in office. When they transfer it to the governor, they kind of make this a dictatorship because now it's only his say and the power to remove a governor as opposed to a local official is so much harder. So what they did, we believe, is unconstitutional in this case law to back it up. What he's doing now and how I got into the case is it's kind of a funny story. It's a friend of mine who owns a strip club. And I work out with the guy. We all box together and nice guy. And I was like, geez, could you come to me with a better case? Could I have like a church or something? Could I fight the governor on better grounds? But then when I thought about it, he's in a worse position because under the CARES Act that Congress voted to give small businesses money to sustain them, under the CARES Act, he's not even eligible because of the SBA, the Small Business Association. Their guidelines, their procedures eliminate funding any type of prurient sexual nature, businesses. So strip clubs can't even get money. So we felt, wow, this is actually a better case from a legal perspective because we go to the judge and say, the state shut him down. They put him out of business. And the state government is not even giving him any relief. He can't qualify for any of this funding. So he's in a more horrible position. We have about 11 different claims that we're making, but I think the one that's most relevant to what would affect everyone is the governor's power to make law.
Well, let me stop you on that one, because basically what you're explaining is that the legislator gave the governor the authority to run the state.
Right.
Correct.
Yes.
So if the legislative body is doing that, ultimately the governor then has control to do things as he sees fit. So then my question to you is this your fault for giving it to the governor?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
It's our fault.
let me ask you this, then, if the legislative body gave the governor this authority, did you do so under the premise that this would happen, or did you do it with the intent that he would have more flexibility to run the state in a more, fair way, so to speak?
In an ideal world, it was exactly what you're saying, that it was to give him enough power to get us through this crisis, enough authority. I struggled with this vote. The reason why I struggled is because I introduced an amendment on this bill that would have required the governor to give the legislature, the state senate, and the state assembly a report on the $40 million, how he spent it each month, right? So they tied that vote with the executive order to allocating $40 million on March 2nd, when we were at the height of this pandemic. They forced a vote, even without waiting the 3 necessary days to vote on a bill. They made it, the governor gave a message of necessity, saying that it was imminent, that we needed to pass this immediately because there was going to be an emergency that was going to get out of control.
This goes to what John McCain used to call pork barrel spending, right? We buried a bridge to nowhere in with the piece of legislation, is what you're describing.
Well, the one part that it may be different in is that this $40 million allocation was strictly for COVID-19. But what I said in the amendment was basically, if we're giving the executive this much authority, where we're expanding his executive order authority, we should at least make sure that we control the purse and to have some accountability there.
How close was that vote?
That failed. My amendment failed.
Even make it?
They didn't even entertain it. I maybe had a few of my colleagues from across the aisle vote in favor of it. Even this overall bill passed by a large margin in both chambers. So I think in the Senate you only had 4 members that voted no, and in the state assembly out of 150 members, we only had 12 vote against it. It was probably one of the most difficult votes I've had in my first 2 years in the state assembly, because I was weighing making sure that we had enough resources to our communities to combat this crisis, especially on March 2nd, and given the authority to the governor. During the floor debate on this, on the amendment, I actually raised the issue about this law for the executive orders. It actually expires, according to the legislation, April 2021. Now, I highlighted this fact because they didn't really even debate that part of this law, but the governor can, in essence, file an executive order to suspend that sunset date. So follow me. He did this with New York City speed cameras.
Basically, we created an emperor position.
And that's exactly what I stated on the
So
floor.
why not have the Senate and the Assembly draft new law?
Well, believe it or not, there is a safeguard in this legislation.
What is it?
And what it requires is both the state Senate and the state Assembly to pass concurrent resolution withdrawing the executive order. The problem becomes we have one-party rule in New York State.
Right.
And to get the Senate majority and the Assembly majority to go against their party leader, who is in essence the governor, because he's a Democrat, that's an uphill battle.
So with one-party rule, history will teach us that the people will often rise up against a particular party, right? We see it in dictatorships. We've seen it in past history. Leaders that govern and dictate end up with a rebellion from the people. And we're seeing some of that now with social distancing, right? We're seeing, we're trying to confine, this is bizarre in the state of New York, we're confining the good people, the working people to their homes and allowing the criminals to be released from the jails, who are now going out and victimizing the good people. And I think we're seeing, from what I can tell, as a backlash from the good people like yourself who are now sitting back saying, you can't stop me from working, I can't feed my family. And yes, I'm a strip club, but let's be honest, a strip club, they get a liquor license, they've been acknowledged as a legitimate business for many, many years.
They have managers, they have bartenders, they
and
have...
in some cases probably health benefits.
Yes.
So when you look at it from that aspect of it, they become a bona fide, victim, injured party, so to speak.
Exactly.
That allows that. We're seeing, the beaches closed, the restaurants, the stores, but people had enough. And I think that can only hurt the governor going forward.
Absolutely.
And the one-party rule.
Absolutely.
The accountability for that has to be, these are the people who are holding you down. And, I think that the people who oppose it need to start identifying the people who are holding them down, to say that you are voting against this, you are keeping us back, and we can't move forward. This whole issue with the COVID and the people dying, it's serious, right?
Yeah.
We lost a lot of bodies. But what I just recently learned is every death is being carried as a COVID death.
Yes.
Now, in my 38 years in the NYPD, as you both well know,
Right.
do we not have a suicide in the course of today? Do we not have people get hit by cars who die?
Right.
We have people raced into emergency rooms with heart attacks who die. Well, they were all being carried as COVID deaths, from what I'm told.
Yeah, I've got that confirmation from a doctor that...
Well, I'm getting it from the
shared that
MD's
with me.
office. I'm getting it right from the
Reminds you of a
mayor's
copy.
own people. Right.
Reminds you of a copy.
Right. You keep it open to keep the numbers down. And this is what's taking place. So I see a rebellion coming. And if more attorneys are out there, the social distancing that's being enforced, should law enforcement be enforcing social distancing?
Oh, absolutely not. I actually spoke at a hearing, a joint Senate and Assembly hearing last week, and it was about the disproportionate impact on minority communities. And believe it or not, it came up about the social distancing and enforcing masks. And I've said it from the beginning that the New York City Police Department and any law enforcement in New York State should not have been charged with enforcing that with civil and criminal penalties. They should have helped to encourage social distancing and wearing a face mask. But I said from the beginning this was going to drive a wedge between our communities, and we see that. We see that whenever, and make no mistake about this, who's at fault for driving that wedge is the governor and the mayor of New York City.
Why?
Why? Because they're the ones who enacted these laws under their executive power and charged our police officers with enforcing this. Now, this is where we become the issue of, is the governor and the mayor actually going to stand up for their police officers who were taking actions under their executive authority?
This mayor will not stand up.
Will not.
I don't think this
So
governor believes.
is the enforcement being targeted at minorities as what's being said? In your opinion, I mean, you're out there, I'm sure if I walked in as a plaintiff I'm being targeted, I present my case, do you think there's foundation there that minorities are being targeted?
I can't comment on the general if somebody comes to me with factual
Right.
circumstances, but I don't think that the police department is specifically targeting minorities.
Right.
I think that's ridiculous to suggest that, particularly under this mayor. And
Well, let me throw this out at you, though, is if statistics are showing more minorities are being issued summonses, right?
that's a different scenario. That's a disparate impact.
But
I think the disparate impact is that minorities are being hit harder.
then why would that be?
But it doesn't have to be targeted. That
What?
they're targeted.
Well, but why would they be receiving more summonses? Are they just refusing to comply?
You got to look at where the calls are generating from. Are people calling in and reporting it? Are people calling 911? What's bringing the police to them? we know as law enforcement that most of our resources are in these communities because that's where the crime is.
Right.
So you're going to have, just by those sheer numbers, more activity. I don't think it's targeted that they're saying go out and get the Black and Hispanic community. I think it's the disparate impact of having these orders and then being in that presence.
Right.
Well, I think we actually have the effect of social media playing in there, where now you're going to have people taking pictures showing that they're not social distancing, they're not wearing a mask, and let's face it, we know how CompStat worked, where we highlighted something, and now the pressure was put on the commanding officers to make sure that they're enforcing things and taking care of it. And you can't tell me that when the reports were coming in that 311 calls on social distancing were taking a higher priority than actual crimes in progress. That was reported in the news because you know what? People in the trenches working day to day are actually saying, why are we not responding to 911 calls faster than 311 calls? Why? Because we're worried about the mayor's image on maintaining social distance. And let's not forget, the governor and the mayor were trying to one-up each other throughout this whole thing.
So
this whole little pissing match they have really hurt the citizens of New York City and New York State.
Again, though, what you're bringing out is prioritizing that enforcement, and we all know how that is with CompStat and whatnot. The mayor issued this initiative; he wants it enforced.
But is the enforcement selective?
But that's what I'm getting at. I don't know if it's selective.
Well, let's take a look at the Hasidic
Well, it comes
community.
down to a cultural thing, too.
But
Yes, they didn't do nothing
The
to them.
Hasidic community, as we all know, and I'm going to go back 38 years because I've been around for it long enough, has always governed their own communities.
Right.
They've always held massive funerals, had stores open when they should have been closed, and for the most part, did what they wanted to do or did what was in their culture. But enforcement that we see, according to the media, is occurring in Hasidic communities.
So you're saying they're pulling back the police in these communities?
Well, I don't believe that we're targeting minority communities, but I do believe they're catching more of the summonses and the enforcement. And the question then becomes why? We had a protest outside PSA 4 with over 100 protesters with cars and all over the streets. Not a single summons was issued, okay? And from what I'm told, it was pretty much minority population in that
It's a sad
issue. Then, a couple days earlier, we have 3 women protesting outside Beth Israel Hospital, all issued a summons. The mayor, factual, and I'm not going to tell you who the sources are, but the mayor is insisting on arrest where we have protest, okay? You can't violate, you know this, you can't violate First Amendment right to protest only if someone's breaking the law. You're disrupting traffic, you're blocking pedestrian walkways, then you can enforce that. The people in this department, the chiefs in this department, do not want to enforce these laws. And they try to push back, but they're not doing a great job of pushing back. Okay, people have been, issued summonses. So, civil liberties, they sue everybody.
Yeah.
For the most part, they sue everybody. Both sides of the fence. They'll defend us and they'll defend. Where are they right now?
It's shocking.
I'm not a lawyer, but we know that this violates the Constitution. So where are they right now?
It's shocking to me that there are 175,000 attorneys licensed to practice in New York. And I was doing a search when I decided I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I'm so offended by what this governor is doing that I wanted to take action. And I'm looking around for other case filings. They're not there.
Well, could it be that people are sitting back waiting for more victims so that the payday comes when we lift social distancing?
Oh, absolutely.
And if we start suing now, maybe we release it now. But if I get more victims, I got more cases. I got a bigger payday.
I don't know. I mean, it could be that someone files a class action once there's a declaration.
Well, if we all agree, and you're the only attorney here, but if we all agree, based on what we know of violation of First Amendment rights and protest, that that's happening, how do the brighter minds than us not jump into this.
Well, I mean, I would love to even act on behalf of the officers who are out there and try to get in federal court an injunction preventing them from being
Well, they've
forced.
stopped the social distancing, but Mike brought up a point. The 311 calls. This is not just what's printed in the newspapers. I've been to the precincts, I talked to the cops, I talked to the supervisors. The 311 calls are a priority. If you're a 911 call, you need help, and I have a 311 call, I have 45 minutes to address the 311 call. If I don't do that in an expeditious time, I possibly could be subject to discipline. And the supervisor now has to investigate the whole thing as to why that call was not answered. So if you're a victim right now, you may be a victim because we couldn't get to your call based on 311 calls. And this is a Mayor de Blasio priority. And how can that make sense that that's more important that someone's making noise versus someone who may be in a vehicle accident with some injuries? It doesn't make any sense.
It does.
And what I'm believing and seeing is that this social distance enforcement that's occurred is now creating a divide amongst us in the community that we've tried to rebuild for years.
Absolutely.
If we're to understand cultural, as you brought this up, right? Cultural, we understand Hasidic culture. We've grown up in this culture. Well, in a minority community, we're talking about a poor community, that we're telling people to stay inside your houses. Okay, you're going to stay inside an apartment that may have air conditioning, may not have air conditioning, that you have nowhere to go. How do we address that cultural issue when people want to go out to the playground, sit in the parks, do things along those lines? There's a little bit of a disparate outcome.
Well, you talk about the wedge yesterday on our first virtual session day. One of the bills, I should say, that were taken up was the old law that's been on the books since the 1930s
Wearing masks.
about wearing masks. I actually
Everyone's in
spoke on
violation.
the bill.
Right.
They introduced it and passed it yesterday in the Assembly and the Senate based on the COVID-19 response, where the police department enforcing people not wearing face masks. Now, during this debate, I said, basically, myself and my colleagues raised the issue of why is there no expiration of your pause on this law? Because, believe it or not, I told them, you're actually going to allow members of the KKK to gather with 3 or more people in front of locations, in communities. And I'm sure you don't want that, because I don't want that.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, you're actually going to empower people to commit crimes. Because now that you took that off, that getaway driver, that lookout, and that third person who's casing that check cashing place, that store, that bar, to commit a robbery, you now took the ability for a police officer to actually look at them, talk to them, a dirty word, stop, question, and frisk.
Right.
Because that's what it's meant for. And guess what? You taking away this law, and now you're endangering your own community members.
What was their response?
They voted yes.
Welcome to New York State, the state that I believe is still
Empowers
number one for
criminals.
people to leave.
Yeah. Well, that's a state that empowers criminals. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about some other laws.
Well, I want to bring this up is, they just passed the green light law. And there's a lot of rumors flying back and forth. Cops are calling, is this true? Is this true? Because it's so bizarre that this actually passed. And Mike, I know you a long time. You always were a person that was out there trying to help people. I know what you do in Staten Island. How did this happen?
Well, let me give you a little quick backstory about last year when they actually passed the first version of the green light law. I was the one tasked in my conference to debate this bill, and I specifically raised the point from a patrol officer's aspect of saying that we're going to limit access to the New York State DMV for law enforcement officers. And at first, the sponsor told me that's not accurate. You can still do a car stop. You could still, in the words that I used to him, run a plate. And he said there's going to be no impact. Fast forward, bill takes effect. Well, Department of Homeland Security investigators who fall under the blanket of ICE. They investigate human trafficking, drugs coming into our ports. Well, when the green light law passed originally, it required the DMV to do another memorandum of understanding with every agency in the United States to be able to have access to the DMV records. That includes photos, registration information, license information. So believe it or not, they took away the Department of Homeland Security's investigators' opportunity to run plates for criminal investigations. They also, not knowing it, and I warned them about it, there were 70 police departments in New York State that didn't realize they had to do the memorandum of understanding again with the Department of Motor Vehicles. They failed to put the paperwork in because they didn't know they had to. So for 30 or more days, you had officers on patrol in New York State in certain departments that could not run a plate on a traffic stop or run a background check on a driver's license. So they stopped them from having access to DMV records. Fast forward to just recently, they amended the green light law because there was an issue with the federal government taking away the Trusted Traveler program. So we were raising issues about this. That's why the feds needed access to be able to get the DMV information. Well, they fixed one aspect of it with the new amendment to this bill, and that was to allow the Trusted Traveler program to look at New York State residents so they can participate again in the program. But when they did that, they tried to put another nail in the coffin of law enforcement. They made it an e-felony if someone shares any information from the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles with a federal law enforcement officer who has any oversight over immigration status and immigration enforcement. So what does that mean? So that means the Homeland Security investigator that's in the ports investigating human trafficking, investigating drugs, can't run a plate in regards to an investigation on the scene as it's happening. I'm going to go one step further with you. I said this on the floor during the debate in the assembly. You have a New York City police officer shot and, God forbid, killed. There's an investigation. Every agency at the state, local, federal level all come out to help. The local New York City FBI field office responds. They are there helping to track down this cop killer. They have a printout of the person wanted, and there's a massive manhunt right now. The picture is a DMV photo. They got it from the DMV website, from their running their license plate, so they can identify this perpetrator. A member of Homeland Security investigator from ICE responds to help in this investigation. The FBI agent now hands that photo to this Homeland Security investigator. That FBI agent can now be charged with an e-felony in New York State.
Committed a felony. It's outrageous.
An e-felony for investigating a murder.
Can I just ask you, Mike, because this goes back to that issue of the message of necessity passages that the governor uses. So I think Article 3, Section 14, am I right?
I think so, yeah.
I really think that we have to educate people about this because they don't understand what's really happening. And it's an abuse of power by the governor because my understanding is that he does it quite oftenly to rush things through. Could you just talk about that a little bit, about the legislative process? The procedural due process requires that you have that bill 3 legislative days before a vote in its final form, so you're aware of what's in it, you know what you're voting on. What does this message of necessity mean to you that you don't have the ability to really examine what you're passing?
Absolutely. So, like you said, Joe, it's been used all the time. They use it through budget bills. So generally what happens is a bill gets introduced, goes to a committee, right? The committee looks at it. They either pass it to go on to the next committee or to the floor vote. They make amendments. It goes through the process. So now you get the bill, it went through the committees, and it's ready to go to the floor so it can be voted on.
Right.
Generally, it's got to have 3 days so then all legislators can review it, can have a public review, and so it can't be voted on until those 3 days expire. Well, with the governor's message of necessity, it waives those 3 days. So what happens is now you get that bill, kind of like the green light amendment law, kind of like that executive order law with the $40 million tied to it to COVID response. That's exactly what happened here. And from a legislator's aspect, I didn't even get a chance to read the bill, and it was already going to be voted on. So we don't get time to evaluate the
So for
impact.
the most part, the people are being deceived.
Oh, absolutely. So
Yes.
I've consistently said this on the floor during my debates, and I try to explain to them, especially when we talk about law enforcement, public safety bills. I go, what's on this paper, these words, how it transitions to the street is so much different. And I go, we're always rushing to be the first. We should be concentrating on being the best. But we're not. We're always rushing to do something. And we don't step back and
Many
look
times they
at what's going to happen.
pass legislation without looking at how it actually functions in the field.
It defeats the whole purpose of a representative government. We want our representatives to look at these laws, debate these laws, and ponder the possibilities, like was just
Do
explained.
you think people are getting tired of government? I mean, we see,
It's so
dysfunction coming out of D.C., New York State. For many years, we have indictments, people going to jail. My view is I don't see people feeling like we're being represented. We're the highest tax state. Our criminals are running free. Our good people are being punished. There was a line in a movie, I think it was The Bronx Tale, The Working Man's a Sucker. And New York State is actually now putting that statement in the forefront.
Yeah.
That you go to work, your taxes go up, we take, you get to go home, and when you get to go home, we'll let out a criminal who may come by and rape your wife. I mean, we're seeing this happening in the streets. And how do you fix it?
Well, I think, it's a great point, and educating the public and what you're doing here with this platform is so valuable and so important. People don't realize what's happening. They assume what they see on TV. They see this wonderful statesman debates that are going on, and they're entering amendments.
I don't even
and
think
they're-
people watch this on TV. I think that people are so busy in their own lives, and they feel that they almost have no control, that they're just like, whatever, and they try to live within it. And, I'm tired of hearing Democrats do this, Republicans do this, Democrats do this, Republicans.
Right.
Does anybody work for the people?
Right.
The movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington should almost be a training film for everyone who gets elected. It's a position to which you work for the people.
Right.
It shouldn't matter what jersey I'm wearing. You find common ground so that everyone wins. And, you may not win with a big score on this one, but next one you may get that's a big score. And it just doesn't seem that that's what happens here.
It's not. And I would just ask you if you could just give a ballpark. How much would you say our legislation that passes are whipped through with this message of necessity?
Oh, during the budget season, it seems like almost every bill that's for the legislation. That's for the budget, I should say.
And it's really just, it's meant and intended for an impending emergency. The governor declares it, or an acting governor, declares some impending emergency that I need this to pass right away. Even when you look at this, it passed on March 3rd. He didn't take any executive action until March 7th. So why did you ram this down their throat and say it was an emergency, an impending doom, we have to I need this power. I didn't even use the power till the 7th. Why? Because they don't want people who dissent to argue and limit that power. He was rushing it through and ramming it through. We have to put a stop to that.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's got to start someplace.
You talk just to give you just one example of the whole rushing to do things to be the first, that they failed to be the best. I debated the bill on 3D firearms, right? So one of the points of the legislation was that possessing a 3D firearm was going to be an e-felony, right? So possession of a firearm now that's defaced, right, without a serial number that can't be traced,
Right.
is a D felony, right? So
Yeah.
it's not DATable. I
Wow.
raised this on debate and said, so we're treating a 3D firearm less severe than a traditional firearm that can be detected, can be picked up on metal detectors as a D felony, and it won't be desk appearance ticket. I think we should slow down,
Right.
resubmit this legislation, and fix that fatal flaw, because if you have a 3D firearm that's unloaded, it's an E felony.
Right.
But someone who has a 3D firearm probably has a nexus to something more nefarious, right?
Right.
And we're treating it as if it's okay. We're going to give you a desk appearance ticket, and in 4 hours you'll be released. We don't even have enough time to notify JTTF,
Wow.
Joint Terrorism Task Force. That's the asinine stuff that I see going on.
But this still passes, though.
It still passes.
So it still
It's
passes.
rushed
So
through.
what
It's rammed through.
tells me is there's a lack of knowledge, a lack of caring. Assembly people, Senate people that are all elected, they're kind of insulated from the real world, right? I mean, they're not living in areas where they become victims. People are hungry, so we give them cake type thing. We give them something to keep them satisfied, and we blame everybody else. Because the truth of it is, from what I see, there's no problem that can't be fixed. I mean, we got a robot on Mars.
Yep.
So how could we not fix these problems? There'll be a vaccine for this COVID virus. It's just a matter of time. But the damage is being done, and the accountability. No one's voting anymore. That's another problem. People don't come out to vote.
You get 25% of the electorate.
So-
I mean, you look at how de Blasio got elected. I think there was 17% voter turnout, and he wins. And now everyone's screaming about it. Well, take a bow. You elected him. That's what happened. Or you didn't come to vote.
Right.
And this is the ramifications of it. New York State, right now, from what I remember, was being told, has got the most amount of people leaving the state. Am I correct on that? Okay. I mean, you grew up in New York State. I grew up in New York State, right? Have you ever seen it this bad? What about you?
No, never seen it this bad. But here's my concern. I bring this up to a lot of my law enforcement friends. As the state and the city is financially strapped and they're economically hurting, we already saw it with the controller, DiNapoli. He took $50 million out of the state pension fund at a time where the market had dropped by 10,000 points.
Right.
Now that money is going to the Small Business Association and giving out to lenders. I don't know if that money's going to come back. I don't know if these businesses can make it back. They're all shut down. So what's going to happen to that money when it goes and those loans come due? And I don't know any financial advisor that would say take money out of the market when it drops 10,000 points. Like, why are we doing that? And my fear is, just to go back to where you were going, so many of our retirees are leaving the state. So much money on the first of the month gets wired, direct deposited out of the state, never to come back to the state. My fear is that they're going to start looking at that pension fund as a bailout.
Well, I would not be shocked. It's been done in the past. If you look at pension funds across the nation, most of them are underfunded. They do not meet the obligations that they have, the government and the municipalities, and not meeting their financial obligations. Now, New York City Police Pension Fund is pretty wealthy, but when we ask for the actuarial numbers to confirm the projections going forward, we get denied. And believe it or not, some of the police unions vote against us receiving the numbers. At the end of the day, if we're putting an assumption rate of 7%, say, how do we know that you're right on what the assumption rate is going to be? What if it's 11% and you're off? So just show us the data and we can all confirm that you're right. And that's an issue. This is a problem nationwide, though. And a lot of states are underfunded big time. You do have to help to get people back into business. Small business has to be helped. I mean, you got restaurants and places that, people are working as cooks and waiters and this, they need to get back in. But don't forget, once they get back in, they spend money, there's tax revenue, and we rebound that way. The longer we wait, the harder it's going to get. The problem is that they'll pass some kind of bill to borrow that money, and then they'll slide in another piece of legislation to piggyback and do the pork barrel thing, and the next thing, we got another program that's terrible. At the end of the day, the government belongs to the people, and the people are supposed to hold accountable the people that are elected.
Amen.
And that's not what's happening.
No, it's
That's
not.
not what's happening. The dysfunction, it goes back and forth because I can't get my way. When you go out to buy a house, we go look at the $1 million house if I like to have it, but you got to settle for the one you could afford.
Yep.
And the elected officials are not doing that. I mean, New York State is dysfunctional. New York City, I've never seen it this bad. And I grew up in the city. I've never seen it this bad. You have an anti-police mayor. Contrary to what you want to talk about the public school system, it's unfathomable that kids graduate who can't read. And I mean, how is that possible? This is what takes place. The city workers, look what took place with the transit workers, how they're getting sick. Our transit system puts more people through the system in 1 year than all of TSA does nationwide. And we look at the transit workers as they're just people that run the trains. They're not just people that run the trains. They're the people who are getting all of us to and from the places we need to be.
They moved the region.
And they're in a multi-billion-dollar operation, and yet they're disregarded. So, the people who live here, which I think we're going to see New York City getting people fleeing because this work from home
Yeah.
process is now got businesses questioning, do I need all the square footage? I can go, have a much bigger house someplace else for less money and work from home. It benefits everybody. You got a happier employee.
Right.
You got less cost to a business. New York City's really fumbling this right now.
Yeah.
There'll be plenty of vacancies here for the homeless. They'll be able to get free apartments the way this is going.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a turnaround, but the turnaround comes from the people. And that's what's missing right now. Mike, you're not up for election this year, you said.
Yes.
You are,
Yeah.
but no one running against you,
No.
which I'm not shocked, all right? Even though you're not running against anyone, I would vote for you, and I live in Long Island. I know what you're made of, and I know you're there for the right reasons. If you got to sue anybody, Joe's always ready to sue somebody, so.
I'm here.
I
good.
might have a case for you,
Yeah.
if you're willing.
Yes.
If you're
yes.
willing.
Find someone who
Believe-
can sue based on the churches were closed on Easter Sunday.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
I mean,
Let's-
we could
let's-
sit 6 feet
Let's
apart.
put this in perspective about essential and non-essential.
Yeah.
Right? So all these businesses, you have those big box stores, but you have this same type of business that's a mom and pop selling the same stuff, and they couldn't, right? We also have some agencies that were enforcing what businesses can be open, and they went into, I'll give you for instance, I'm not going to name the agency because I don't want to disparage the men and women that are working, but I want to highlight something. They walk into this paint store on Staten Island, and they say, you're not supposed to be open. What do you mean? I'm in the executive order. I sell hardware. I have hammers, I have screws, I have screwdrivers. I'm part of the executive order as essential business. What makes you a hardware store? Well, I sell paint, I sell the stuff I just mentioned, and the agent basically says, well, I don't get it. Why paint? Well, the governor actually said in one of his press conferences, hey, it's a good time to stay home and paint your room.
Yeah, he did say that. Right.
Wow!
Right.
So my issue is that we have the city, state, local municipalities
Right.
not giving the right information to those workers that are enforcing what's
yeah.
essential and non-essential. Also, I want to highlight that you notice who was always essential. Those employees, the contractors that were installing New York City speed cameras. Now, that was never stopped,
Yeah.
right? That's another thing that I
Why
think
is that essential?
we should
Yeah.
really. But let me
Revenue
tell
for the
you,
city.
that's the lawsuit because under New York City speed camera law, it said 750 school speed zones. The city's looking to do 2,000. Violates the law.
Wow.
It's all about the money,
Yeah.
We're going to wrap it up. Anything to add?
No, just I want people to rise up and come together and stand up for yourself. This is our government.
You would have been a
We,
good
the
union
people.
president.
Oh, thank you.
Mike,
Get out and vote. It matters.
we want to have you back. I want to have both of you back.
Thank
This
you.
was good.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you for watching, and we'll have more for you next week.